Thank you for that. I'm here to talk about the new long life. It's always a pleasure to be in Singapore. One of the things I realized as I was flying in here was I was born in 1965. I study longevity and age, so I'm interested in these things. And that, of course, is also when Singapore began its life as an independent nation. So I'm as old as Singapore. And we both changed quite a lot since 1965. Those 54 years have seen a lot of growth and a lot of change in how we live our life. And I guess if you want to think about the next 54 years, both for me and Singapore, there's also going to be a lot of really dramatic changes. And New Long Life refers to the next book I've got coming out, which looks at how AI and robotics and longevity together are going to change our world. And they're going to lead to some pretty dramatic changes. Everything changes. How we work, when we get educated, what our careers are like, what the economy does, what our relationships are, what society is like, we're all going to change in a pretty fundamental way. And of course we're here to look at FinTech, but if our life changes in a fundamental way, so too does our financial needs. So it's going to be a really huge agenda. And what I think is interesting as an economist is most people kind of look worried about AI and robotics. You know, robots are going to take over the world, take over our jobs. Longevity is about an aging society. We can't afford to get old, and how miserable it is to get old. I'm going to say that's wrong, because this is a wonderful new technology, and if we're living longer, healthier lives, that sounds good. And what do we as individuals and we as a society want from these two forces? How do we bring them together to make our world better and our life better? So that's going to be my focus. Now this is the chart I'm going to begin with. It's what I think of as the demographic equivalent of Moore's Law. You all know Moore's Law, every 18 months computing power doubles. Well, this is not quite so dramatic. It's not about exponential growth. What it says is that every 10 years, something called best practice life expectancy increases by 2 or 3 years. So what's best practice life expectancy? It's a country anywhere in the world that at any moment in time has the best life expectancy at birth. And look at that linearity. Over the last 100 years, every decade, life expectancy has increased by 2 or 3 years. In Singapore, it's even more dramatic. In Singapore, life expectancy has been increasing 3 years every decade. Now, whenever I say this, I get the same audience response as you're giving me. You look a bit underwhelmed by that. When people put up charts of Moore's Law, they're amazed by it. But very few people get amazed by this. But let's put it a different way. This means that every generation is living in Singapore around 9 years longer than the previous generation. If you judge your life expectancy by your grandparents, you're going to be out by about 18 years. People are living a lot longer. At every age, you have more time. So how do we adjust to this change in life expectancy? And actually, we've hardly begun to change. Okay, so this is what I'm about. How do we deal with longer lives? Now, if you listen to most debate about Singapore and demographics, it's all about an aging society. The average age of society is increasing. And that kind of is true. As the birth rate falls, younger cohorts are smaller. And as people live for longer, older cohorts are larger. So you get a big increase in the average age of society. And Singapore has both one of the oldest, the longest life expectancy, and also one of the oldest average age of society. But that aging society kind of sounds bad news. No one gets excited about aging. But it's missing this really good point that actually what is really happening is our lives are getting longer. There is a longevity agenda. What we discovered in the 20th century was that age is malleable to a degree that we didn't think previously possible. We can affect how we age. So exercise, diet, we know that makes us age better. Education, community, friends, purpose, engagement. And right now there's also a lot of really interesting scientific work in understanding why we age. Many scientists are now arguing we should consider age as a disease. And of course if it's a disease, we can have an aspiration to cure aging. Now I'm not here to tell you you're going to live to 500 or 1,000, which some of those scientists do. What they're trying to do is get us to live healthily to 120. The oldest person ever to have lived died at the age of 122 years and 164 days. But what's interesting is if you look at that increase in life expectancy that I was telling you about, most of those years of life have been healthy years of life. The proportion of life that is healthy is remaining constant. So as we're living for longer, we're healthier for longer. What is happening is the relationship between biological and chronological age is shifting. But we as a society always think about chronological age. Oh, there's more people aged over 65, there's more old people. But that's to measure things chronologically. 65-year-olds today are healthier than they used to be. We are aging better. It isn't just that there are more old people, but how our aging is changing. And that's really important because this change in life expectancy, everyone thinks that's about having more years at the end of life. But because we're aging better, really what's happened is we've got a whole bunch of extra years in midlife, kind of my age, 50 plus. That used to be old, but I don't think it is anymore. We've got a realistic expectation of many more years of healthy living. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question is, what do you want to do with all those extra hours? This is really what this is about. Not an aging society and more old people, but if every generation in Singapore is living nearly 10 years longer than the previous one, it's about time. What do you want to do with that time? And if the time isn't all at the end of life, but available to you over all your life, we need to change the map of life. Now what's interesting about time is we think it's kind of something that physicists tell us about. But actually time is a social convention. We as a society decide how to structure time. In the 20th century, we invented the weekend. Weekend didn't used to exist before the 20th century. We also invented teenagers. Before the 20th century, we had children and adults. We never had teenagers. And we also invented retirement, so we invented pensions. And as we're seeing life expectancy increase, we're inventing whole new stages of life. Adult development is now continuing into the 20s. People are marrying later and having children later. People are working later. I said earlier that every 10 years, life expectancy in Singapore has increased by 3. And I say, you look totally unimpressed by that stunning statistic. Let's put it another way. That's like saying at the end of every day, at the end of every 24 hours, here's another 8 hours. The day going from 24 to 32 hours long. And if you had a 32-hour day, you would live it differently. I don't know how you'd live it differently. You'd have to find out what works for you. Me, I'd get up earlier. I'd go to bed later. I'd have a lovely sleep in the middle of the day. And I would probably get my work done in the morning and I would kind of play in the afternoon. I probably wouldn't have 3 meals anymore. I'd have 5 meals a day. Hopefully smaller ones, or else I wouldn't get to 100 years. And I'd call some of them still breakfast, lunch and dinner, but they'd be at different times and take a different form, and I have to come up with 2 new meals. What on earth am I talking about? That's what's happening with the map of life. We are inventing new stages of life. All around the world we're seeing people experiment. Whether they're 20, 50, 80 or 90, they're behaving differently. Everyone at every age has more time ahead of them, and they're acting in a younger way. Now the question is, how do we structure this extra time? How do we structure a life over 100 years? Because no one's had to do it before. Those people who have reached 100 are kind of lucky, they didn't plan to do it. We sort of planned a life for 70 years. Education, work, retirement. A 3-stage life. That worked up to 70, but it has all sorts of problems if you try and stretch it out to 100. If you look at sort of people's savings, if you want to retire with a pension of about 50% of your final salary, a 100-year life means you're working till you're about 80. It means a 60-year career. That's not a particularly exciting prospect for many people. Think about how you currently work. 60 years doing the same thing with the same intensity. It may solve your financial problems, but it doesn't sound like a good recipe for life. That's because there are 4 assets you have to think about. Over your life, you've got to make sure that none of these assets go empty. And financial assets are just one of them. You've also got to think about your productive assets, your skills and knowledge. And over a 60-year career, what you learn at 20 is not going to last. You'll need lifelong learning, and quite big dollops of lifelong learning. The other thing you're going to have to worry about is your vitality assets. Now, your vitality assets are of two types. They're your physical and mental health, and also your relationships. And I am an economist, but let me tell you the secret of a happy life. Money makes you happier, it doesn't make you happy. Study after study says that what makes for a good life is relationships. The ability to love and to be loved. And that requires time and investment. 60-year career, working as hard as you do, how are you going to invest in your mental and physical health? How are you going to invest in those relationships? And then the other thing that's going to become incredibly important with these longer lives is the last asset, transformational assets. Your ability to deal with change. Because over a longer life, you're going to go through more stages to life. The 3-stage life is breaking up. You can expect to see a multi-stage life. A multi-stage life with different stages to your career. One may be about making money, one may be a better work-life balance, one may be entrepreneurial, one could be putting something back into the community. And you can rearrange these lives in lots of different ways. But that's the only way you can carry on making sure that you're investing across your life in these 4 assets. And of course, if you put technology on top of this, you can see that you're going to go through even more stages and more career changes as technology disrupts the labour market. The book of life is getting longer, the chapters are getting shorter. You are going to have to work out what is your theme behind your life and what links all these stages together. So a 3-stage life is breaking up. We are seeing instead a multi-stage life begin to emerge. Now let me come back to what is the theme, of course, of this conference, which is FinTech. And of course, money and time are very closely linked. And only an economist could possibly say that. If you think about what the financial sector tries to do, for an economist it does 2 things. It transfers money from one time to another, from when I'm young to when I'm old, or when I borrow now and I pay back later. It also transfers money across different states of the world, so insurance. If I'm healthy, I pay premiums. If I get ill, I get paid some money. And of course, as life elongates, as we get this multi-stage life, we're going to have to transform totally how we shift money from one period to another. We invented pensioners in the 20th century, so we invented pensions. But if a 3-stage life goes, a multi-stage life takes its place, you're going to be interested in getting access to your money at different stages across your life. You're also going to be interested in whole new risks. Because although you're living longer and healthier for longer, that's the average outcome. You're going to need insurance about living to 100 years but being ill at 50 and perhaps being in a wheelchair. We have whole new risks that we need to deal with. And so FinTech mustn't just be about using a technology to do all the things we've always done. It's got to be about designing these new products for this new multi-stage life. And of course, I said earlier there were 4 different assets, and I stressed health and education. Well, you as an individual over your life need to keep balance on all of those assets. And one of the things I find really interesting, and seeing it here, and particularly talking to Prudential in Singapore, is how we're seeing a combination of FinTech and health tech coming together. Because FinTech is often about getting rid of financial intermediaries. It's about giving people greater control over their data so they can monitor their own financial health and control their own finances. Well, the same principles also hold for health. I need that health data to tell me how I'm aging. By the way, you can now measure how you're aging biologically. Just wait till you get that app on your phone and you're going to see how you exercise, how you sleep, affects how you're aging. I've got a little bit of that already on one of these devices I'm wearing today. So integrating finance with health and other assets is going to be absolutely crucial. And of course, that's where FinTech can come in supporting a longer, more positive life. We need to monitor our assets more closely and transform things around. What is so key is we don't structure our life around our finances, but we structure our finances around our life. With a more flexible multi-stage life, we need more flexible financial assets and institutions, which is where I think FinTech comes in. I just finished by going back to what I said at the beginning. Singapore and I are both 54. I wrote a book called The 100-Year Life, so there's kind of an outside chance I might see another 54 years going forward. I think Singapore's going to look a lot healthier in 54 years' time than I will. But if I think about the future I'm talking about, Singapore has an aging population and high life expectancy. If you look at the challenges it's dealt with over the last 54 years, this is our opportunity to seize the advantage of AI and longevity and build a better life. Thank you very much for your time.